Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jersey Drozd. I am the former executive director of Cartoon Crossroads Columbus. But even in that capacity, I want to express my gratitude that you're all here today and for participating in Chris Schweitzer's workshop. I think you're going to have a good time. Before I introduce him, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. Cartoon Crossroads Columbus acknowledges that the ancient ancestors of the Eastern Woodlands tribes, now referred to as the Adena and Hopewell cultures, inhabited the land we know as Ohio. Their descendants include the living nations of the Shawnee, Miami, Wyandot, Delaware, and Seneca Cayuga. We honor and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this place where we gather. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors. I mean, you may have noticed this event is free. No one has asked you for any money unless you're in the expo and buying one of the amazing comics down there, but there's no entrance fee. There's no cover charge to be here. And that's because of these people: the Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Ohio Arts Council, White Castle, the Columbus Foundation, UBS, the Japan Foundation, and our other festival sponsors. A lot of people are needed to make this thing happen. So all of these programs and the expo are free to attend because of their support. So thank you to them. And now I would like to introduce our presenter. Before I do, does anybody here like to draw? Okay. Has anybody here ever been accused of overthinking their art? Maybe a little bit? You are in luck, because I would describe Chris Schweitzer as a jolly philosopher cartoonist, and one of the only ones, and that makes him the best, but he would be the best even if there were 1,000 of him. But I'm so grateful for him, because he is one of those people where when I'm in his presence, I'm like, I'm not overthinking this, because thinking is so much fun. And an amazing cartoonist, thinker, and I would say autodidact. This is a very curious man who just loves to learn. So I think you're going to walk out of here actually kind of energized in thinking about, like, the world is such a much more interesting and curious place because you've been exposed to the way this man thinks. So with that, I will hand it over and introduce you all to Chris Schweitzer.
Hey y'all, that is a lot of pressure to do a good presentation. Thank you all so very much for coming out. We've got a breadth of ages here today. We've got adults, we've got kids. So I'm going to try to keep this sort of general to the point that hopefully it will be useful for everybody. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about today is looking for research examples that you can use to inspire your character design. So one of the things that a lot of people do when they are working on a comic, when they're working on an animation, if they're putting together a book, is design their characters, create the physical look of what their characters are going to look like, what their characters are going to be wearing, and that can help with the writing, it can help with the storytelling to have that accessible and on hand. And that also is one of the most fun parts, and it's a part that a lot of people spend a lot of time with. If you are of college age or are thinking about going into a career of doing production art for games or movies or things like that, something that's important to know is that there really isn't such a job as a character designer. There will be a credit for character designer on a lot of movies and things like that, but really that's somebody who is working in the story department doing that specifically. And if you want to do character design, you also have to show that you are good at doing environmental design, that you're good at doing props, that you're good at doing storyboards, things along those lines, because it's usually somebody from that pool that they see a particular aesthetic and they say, oh, we really like how you're doing this stuff and we'd like for you to design the look of the characters for this particular project. By props, I mean the objects that that move around in the story. So if a character has a chair or a sword or anything along those lines. So basically drawing the objects and also designing the objects. So just like with character, you start to think about, well, what makes this character unique? What makes it unique to this world and this story that I'm telling? You also want to think about that in terms of the objects. Every chair is different. Like if you look at this chair, if you were to draw a chair out of your head, it would probably look something like this. That is a bad marker. We'll use a good marker. It would probably look something like this. It has a back, it has a seat, and it has legs. And so that is sort of your basic chair. That is one of 10,000 types of chairs. So these chairs have a little bit more of a sleek quality to them. They swoop. They've got legs that come out from the center and spiral. You have chairs that are on a pole with wheels. Any different type of chair is going to say something different about your world. And the best thing that you can do when you are designing characters, when you're designing environments, anything along those lines, is to sketch from real life. And sketching from real life, if you're used to drawing out of your head, can be hard because it becomes really easy to see what your shortcomings are. When you start to draw, your drawing, when you're looking at stuff, may not look as good as the stuff that you're doing out of your head, a little more stylized. And that can be feel like an insurmountable obstacle because it makes you feel like you're not as good as you want to be. But that's where you start to build up a mental catalog of different things. And if you draw every chair that you see, eventually you'll be able to come up with any kind of chair that you need out of your head because you'll understand how chairs work. The same goes with faces, with costumes. Like if you draw people that you see when you're at school, if you draw people that you see when you're out at a restaurant, you can pause the TV and draw different faces. It'll start to build up a catalog of different features that you can start to use in your work. And today we're going to be talking about historical stuff. And really with historical stuff, you're doing the same thing. Your job is to build up a catalog that you can draw from because you have lots of different resources when you're looking for historical things. Books being a good example, movies being a good example, going to the museum and seeing clothing or paintings of people from different time periods. Those can be helpful tools. But in any of these, it's really hard not to just copy exactly what you're seeing because you don't necessarily have a context to build from to make characters that are unique to you but still feel like they belong to this time period. And so one of the things that I like to do when I am looking at a particular time period, so somebody here who is under 18, can you tell me a time period that you think might be interesting? Like, yes. Like the medieval period, that's a great example. So the medieval period, we have a lot of different references that we can use. Some of them are what we call secondary sources, which are recreation art. So that's things like movies, it's things like books that show how armor work or illustrations of different costumes. You can get a lot of books in like the fashion section that are like historic costumes through the ages, and you can see how different things are worn. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to get as many of those resources as possible and look for things that carry over from one costume to another. So like everybody might have a different type of dress, but all of those dresses might have a long sleeve. And so then I'll start making notes of things that I see. I'll say, okay, well, if everybody has a sleeve that opens into a really wide sleeve hole, then that's something that I'm going to incorporate into my design. And if everything else is kind of all over the place, then you start to have the freedom to do all kinds of different things, but you have those particular elements that you can use to draw from to make it look like it's of that time. Usually we call those iconographic elements. Those are elements that everybody recognizes through exposure, usually through movies or through commercials or through Halloween costumes or something like that. So like with the Middle Ages, what's something that you might see a lady wearing in the Middle Ages? Can anybody give me an example? Yeah. A really big dress. So a lot of times you had these dresses that reached ankle length. You had big sleeves, a lot of voluminous fabric, and the closer to our time that you got as you move from the early Middle Ages to the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, those dresses become bigger and bigger and bigger. And so you have really big dresses. Sometimes you might see those conical hats that have the veil on them. That was only for a very short period of historical time, but it's a period of historical time that because those hats have such a distinct silhouette, we use them a lot in art, we use them a lot in movies, and so you start seeing those repeated again and again, and those become an easy signifier for the time period. So one of the things that I also like to do when I'm working on character design is to think about shape and to think about what shapes the characters make. And so anytime I'm coming up with a story, I usually don't start with designing one character. I think about what the cast of characters is going to look like, because what I like to do is make sure that each of them looks different from everybody else. And so sometimes I might have a character that I think of as mostly rectangular. Sometimes there's one that's mostly triangular. You might have one that's kind of like this. You might have a circle. And there are a lot of different shapes. They don't have to be shapes that you recognize and can say. They can be shapes that you just make. And what I'll then do is I'll start to build up what those characters are going to look like in silhouette. And it's hard to draw a silhouette with a marker like this, so I'm just going to draw an outline. But like for a character like this, I'll use those triangular elements when I'm doing the drawing. And so you'll start to see a lot of triangles in there. He has a little mustache. And so that might be my simplified triangular version. And as I start to refine that story, I tend to work a little more naturalistically than this. So I'll still incorporate those triangle elements, but they'll start to be a little less stylized. They'll be hard angles and edges, but I'm thinking about that triangle as I'm drawing. And so it becomes really helpful. And so different shapes give us different, suggest different things to us when we're drawing them. So what's something about a triangle? Tell me something, if you just see a triangle, what's a reaction that you might have to a triangle? Like if somebody threw a triangle at you, it's edgy. You don't want to catch a triangle. It's got points. So somebody throws a circle at you, you catch it. Somebody throws a triangle at you, you move your hand out of the way. And so what that does is that suggests to the audience that there are certain things about a triangle that might be true about this character. Triangles have a sense of dynamism because things that have three parts tend to be teetering. You don't exactly know what's going to happen with a triangle. So there's a little bit of unpredictability. There's a little bit of danger. There's a little bit of there's energy because you have these lines sort of pointing in these different directions. And so your triangle can convey some of these things. So there's a reason that a lot of villain characters have a lot of triangles in them. It can be really, like you have Shredder in the Ninja Turtles, you have Darth Vader has a lot of triangles. His mouth is a triangle, his cape creates a triangle. Triangles can be dangerous. They can also just seem really dynamic. So like Dash in The Incredibles, his hair makes a triangle, he stands like a triangle because he's fast, and triangle suggests that speed. A circle, if a triangle is potentially dangerous, a circle is the opposite. A circle is friendly and welcoming. Fairy godmothers have a lot of circles in them. You want to hug a circle. Circles are easy to be friends with. But sometimes you can use those expectations to feel a little bit unsettling. So if we all feel like circles tend to be friendly, then when you create something that is mostly circle-based that isn't friendly, it can be very off-putting and make you feel very unsettled. And so like King Candy and Wreck-It Ralph is very circle-based, and so you're like, with that, the Kingpin in Spider-Man, the Into the Spider-Verse, and the regular Spider-Man comics, is a big circle. And that's kind of unsettling because it just creates this big, massive shape that should be something you can run up and hug, but you don't want to hug the Kingpin. And so something that this is really helpful for me for when I'm working on historical stuff especially is I mentioned those elements that you see repeated over and over. So you might have everybody wearing a type of armor that creates specific shape. You might have everybody wearing a specific type of dress that creates a particular shape. This is especially true if you're doing like war stories where people are wearing similar uniforms, or if they're in a school and they're wearing uniform. Anything where people are wearing uniforms, you're going to find this kind of situation popping up and up again. And so it's very easy for me to fall into the trap of all of my characters start to have those same angles and the same shape. And so when you look to these shapes, you can start having something where a character everybody might be wearing the same suit of armor, but you might draw those shoulders with more of a round bend on one character and more of a sharp bend on the other. And the armor may be the same, but the way that you're choosing to draw it changes from one character to the other. And what that does is it lets, in addition to just carrying some narrative weight with it, it also makes it really easy for your audience to distinguish one character from another. Sometimes from a distance, if characters are running along a rooftop and jumping, the more that you can differentiate those characters in silhouette, that you can see who they are just by the shape of their body, the better off your audience will be with understanding what it is that you're doing. So I grabbed a bunch of books from the kids section. Some of these have really helpful illustrations, some don't. But you might glance through. So here's a book of Gladiators. And so here they've got a reproduction of this mosaic that shows some of the different outfits here. So like, for example, in this one, can everybody kind of see this one from here? They all have a belt here, and they all have what I assume is sort of a draped toga that is tucked up to create this kind of diaperish looking thing. So if these are my only two examples of gladiators, all of them are going to be wearing this diaper quality thing. And something that is, I think, interesting that we can do is that if you are working with historical stuff and drawing historical things, you know, cowboys, ninjas, knights, anything like that, you have particular tastes. You have grown up in a particular time, you're around particular people, and you know what is and isn't cool and fashionable in terms of appearance. And you can carry that over to the characters that you draw. You can think about what is it that makes these guys look weird. So if you've got these characters here, and this guy is wearing this thing. Also, looking at something and seeing how it probably works can be helpful for figuring out what's going to be useful for you. So looking at this, there are a lot of different ways you could interpret this image, but I assume that this is a draped down shirt that is pulled up here and tucked in here, and that makes it to where you have, so you have this thing. That makes it to where you essentially have pants. So now that I know that, I can think, okay, well, which characters do I want to look the most like us? We do not wear puffy diaper toga pants. And your audience is going to feel a little bit weird if your main character is doing that, because you want your main character to feel as close to your audience as you can. And so what I would do in this instance is I would make them look a little bit closer to shorts. So this one's not going to be all that puffy. It still looks like underwear, but you know what? That's what we have to work with. So now this character might be our main character. If I have a character who's comic relief and a little bit silly, I'm going to really exaggerate the puff of these pants here. I probably should have used the... So these characters might be built the same, but now this character has a very puffy pants thing. It looks almost like he's wearing a bow tie for pants. And so that is going to create a different response in your audience. It's not only going to differentiate one character from the other, but it's also going to let us know like what it is that we can think about that. Now, another character, if they had a character that they're fighting, it's a gladiator story, so maybe they're going to be fighting each other. In those instances, what would we do in that case? That guy is going to have a really well-fitting one, but it's also going to have some other elements. So if he has like a smaller belt, this one's going to have a bigger belt. If this one comes across like a toga like that, then this one will maybe not have a shirt at all. Or we'll have a full shirt. Maybe it'll come up like a two-fold thing, or wrap around and back across. That might be a way that could be done. And actually, I would probably do that with my main character because it's going to create something closer to what we're used to. That looks more like a shirt. That makes us feel a little bit more comfortable with that character. But looking at those different elements and how they work and figuring out how can I repeat these, but also change them up to where they feel very specific to each individual is going to be a really helpful tool. But that's some stuff about the historical side of things. Does anybody have any questions about design or using research or reference or anything along those lines? Yeah. That's totally fine. That's great. The thing that's interesting about mythology and fictional stuff is that a lot of times the visuals that we associate with it tend to be historical. And so if you're looking at like ancient Greece, a lot of the stuff when you think about like, well, what do those animals look like or creatures look like? What do those characters look like? What do those Greek gods look like? We tend to look a lot at what we call primary sources, which are things that are made at the time of the things that we're studying. And so in those instances, there are a lot of vases that have those things drawn onto them. There are a lot of sculptures, and those tend to repeat over and over. And so if you see an illustration in a book that shows a hydra, or that shows a nymph, or that shows Hercules or Achilles or Artemis or anything along those lines, probably you are seeing an illustration based on an illustration based on an illustration of one of those original friezes or one of those original vases or something like that. And what I found, and I love drawing mythological stuff, is one of my favorite things is drawing folklore and mythology, usually medieval and ancient world. And what I will do, because I see those same designs over and over, is I like looking at the historical stuff and seeing what I can pull out that's different. And so if I'm looking at ancient Greece, I start looking at, well, what are some other clothing that was being worn at the time in ancient Greece that isn't just a toga? Like what kind of armor is being worn, what kind of tunics are being worn, what kind of shoes are being worn. And I'll look for things that could have been used during that time, but that aren't usually in art. And I'll start to pull those elements in, especially if I think they'll fit the style of the character. And then a lot of times you can come up with neat ideas that you haven't seen before, but that still feel very much like part of the place that you're wanting to focus on. And same with animals. And if you're doing any kind of monster design or creature design, looking at real animals and seeing how they work can give you great ideas for how to draw them. So like if you're doing a griffin or something, instead of doing the same griffin that you always see, which is, you know, a hawk head and an eagle body, a hawk head and a lion body, you might think, well, what if I did an owl and a house cat body? What if I did a cardinal or a blue jay and a snow leopard body? Like it can start to give you ideas for different things that you can do. Or you may say, what if I want it to look more like a cat than a bird? Like, are there things that I can do that suggest the bird part? And that might be just coloring. Like you might just draw a lion, but make its muzzle black so that it looks like a beak. Like there are a lot of different things that you can do to play with to come up with fresh designs that still feel like what your audience is expecting, but give them a little bit of something new, which I think is really a lot of fun. Any other questions? All right, Jersey, did you have anything? Oh, how long do we have in here? Oh, I thought it was a half hour, so I was trying to rush things. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Well, that's great. Okay, so I've got some drawing supplies there if anybody wants to. And we've got books here if anybody wants to pick up some books and look for and if you want to pull a chair over to the table, if you want to look through the books and see if there's a title that grabs you, what I'd like you to do is look through and see if you can find an illustration that looks kind of like what you might want to draw. And then we can talk about avenues for turning that into an original design. So for everybody else who doesn't want to draw, I will let you go. Thank you so very much for coming out today. And the drawing need not be confined to kids. If you're an adult who wants to do some drawing, go for it.